The bolt was already in the air when I understood we were about to lose everything we believed. My name is Vex Kathir, and I am a senior observer of the Ithran Assembly. I was standing 11 steps from the human delegation when a young guard beside me lost control of his weapon. His hand shook, his finger closed on the trigger before his mind gave the order. A bolt of raw plasma left the barrel and screamed across the room, faster than thought, aimed straight at a young human woman named Lucy Hart, who stood unarmed near the door with a translation device still clipped to her collar. I had already begun to calculate the outcome. My people process danger in fractions of a heartbeat, and in that fraction, I understood the truth with total certainty. No living body could reach her in time. No nervous system, ours or theirs, could close that gap. She was going to be hit, and there was nothing anyone in that room could do about it. Then a man named Owen Bright moved. He was not close to her. He was not trained for this. He was simply a soldier assigned to walk beside the human ambassador during the peace talks, a quiet man who rarely spoke unless spoken to. In the space of a single breath, he crossed the distance between himself and Lucy Hart, put himself between her and the bolt, and closed his bare hand around a blast of superheated plasma as if he were catching a thrown stone. The sound that came from him was not a scream. It was a short, sharp grunt, the kind a person makes when they stub a toe on a hard object. Smoke rose from his fingers, his arm shook from the force of it, and then, calmly, almost lazily, he dropped the dying bolt to the floor, where it sputtered out against the tile like a spent firework. For 4 full seconds, nobody in that room moved. I know it was 4 seconds, because counting time precisely is something every member of my species is trained to do from birth. 4 seconds of total, frozen silence, broken only by the soft hiss of scorched metal cooling on the floor. Owen looked down at his blistered palm, flexed 2 fingers that still worked, and said the first words anyone spoke since the weapon had fired. He said it was nothing serious, and that he would need a bandage. That was the moment the guard who had fired the shot dropped his weapon and began to make a low, mournful sound that our people only make when something they were taught since birth turns out to be false. I need you to understand what had just happened, because to my people, this was not simply an act of courage. It was a violation of a law we believe to be as certain as gravity. For 11,000 cycles, my people have followed a teaching called the reflex law. It was given to us long ago by the great teachers we call the ancestral choir, though your language has no perfect word for what they are to us. The reflex law states that no living nervous system, no matter how advanced, can react to danger faster than 0.08 of a second. It is not a suggestion, it is not a guideline. It is treated as an unshakable fact of the universe, taught to every child before they learn to walk on their upper limbs. Our entire military doctrine was built around this number. Our defensive shields react in 90,000ths of a second, a small margin above the supposed limit, because our teachers assured us that no organic creature could ever move faster than that. We built our sense of what an enemy could do around this single number. We built our confidence around it. And in front of 40 witnesses, a tired-looking human soldier, with no augmentation on record, had just moved roughly 4 times faster than the reflex law claimed was possible for any living creature to move. I was assigned, along with 2 senior priests of our assembly, to investigate what we had witnessed. What I learned in the following days shook something in me that I did not know could be shaken. The senior priest assigned to the case was named Vashta I. She had taught me the reflex teachings herself when I was young, still learning to walk properly, still small enough to be carried on the upper limbs of my caretakers. She had spent 300 cycles in service to the assembly, and she had never once questioned the teachings she had spent her whole life passing on to others. She requested a private meeting with Owen Bright. I was permitted to observe from the side of the room, silent, recording everything for the official record. Owen sat across from her with his bandaged hand resting on the table, looking more tired than proud, more embarrassed than heroic. He kept glancing toward the door, as if he expected someone to tell him this meeting was unnecessary and he could go rest instead. Vashta I began carefully. She asked him what had gone through his mind in the moment before he moved. He thought about it for a long moment before answering. He said that nothing had gone through his mind at all. He said that thinking was too slow for what needed to happen, so his body had simply acted on its own, the way it does when you catch something falling off a table before you even realize you have reached out your hand. VoidBreaker asked him if his people had ever measured the true limits of the human body, the way our teachers had measured the limits of ours. Owen said that people had tried. He said that coaches and doctors and scientists were always setting numbers on what a person could or could not do, and that just as often, someone came along and broke those numbers completely. He said his people had a saying, that a record exists only until someone decides it does not. VoidBreaker sat back in her seat, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked uncertain. She asked him the question that had clearly been building inside her since the moment the bolt struck his hand. She asked him what stopped his people from destroying themselves, if there was no fixed floor beneath what was possible, if anyone could simply decide to try something considered impossible, and sometimes succeed. Owen looked down at his injured hand before answering. The plasma had burned through 2 fingers badly enough that the medics said it might never fully heal. He did not complain about the pain. He simply looked at his hand as if it belonged to someone else, someone who had made a choice he still agreed with. He said that nothing stopped his people from trying. He said that was both the danger and the strength of who they were. He said humans did not have a fixed floor to their limits. They only had people who had not yet found where the true floor was, because they kept falling through the parts that were not there. I recorded every word of that conversation, and I have replayed it in my mind more times than I can count since that day. The investigation that followed took several cycles. My superiors wanted proof. They wanted a scientific explanation that would preserve the reflex law, some special condition that made Owen Bright different from an ordinary human, some hidden augmentation our scanners had somehow missed. They sent their best medical officers to examine him. They found nothing. His body was, according to every measurement our technology could take, an entirely ordinary human body. No implants, no enhancements, no unusual genetic markers. Simply a man who had moved faster than our gods had claimed any living creature could move. This discovery did more damage to my people than any weapon ever could. A war might have united us against a common enemy. This truth divided us against ourselves, because it meant the teachings we had built our entire civilization upon were, at best, incomplete. I was present at the gathering, where the senior priests debated what to do with this knowledge. It was not a peaceful meeting. Some among the priesthood argued that the incident should be hidden from the wider population, buried in classified records where it could never threaten the stability of the reflex law. Others argued that hiding the truth would be a far greater betrayal than admitting our teachers had been wrong. VoidBreaker, the same priest who had questioned Owen Bright with such careful control, stood before the gathering and said something I will remember until the end of my days. She said that a teaching which cannot survive being questioned was never truly a law of the universe at all. It was only a wall built by people who were afraid of what lay beyond it. Not everyone agreed with her. Some priests left the gathering in open anger, refusing to accept that a species without our discipline, without our ancient wisdom, could have shown us something our own teachers had missed. I understood their anger, even as I did not share it. It is a difficult thing to learn, that a truth you built your whole life around was only ever a partial truth, waiting for someone else to walk past its edges. In the following season, I was assigned to remain close to the human delegation, as part of the continued peace negotiations. This gave me many opportunities to observe Owen Bright and the other humans more closely, and what I learned only deepened the questions inside me. I watched Owen train with other soldiers in an open courtyard near the embassy building. He did not move like someone who considered himself remarkable. He moved like someone constantly testing where his own boundaries were, pushing a little further each time, accepting small failures along the way without any visible shame. When he missed a target or stumbled during a drill, he laughed it off and tried again, as if failure itself was simply part of the process of finding out what he could do. I asked him once, during a quiet afternoon, while we waited for a delayed meeting to begin, why his people seemed so comfortable with failing in front of others. Among my kind, failure in public is treated as a source of deep personal shame, something to be avoided at nearly any cost. Owen thought about the question seriously before answering, which I had come to learn was something he always did. He said that if you were never willing to fail in front of someone, You would never try anything difficult enough to be worth doing. He said every person he respected most had failed loudly, many times, before they managed to do something worth remembering. I asked him if he had been afraid, in the moment the bolt was fired toward Lucy Hart. He said there had been no time to be afraid. He said fear was something that came before or after a moment like that, never during it. During the moment itself, there was only the door, and behind it, a very simple choice about which side of that door he wanted to be standing on when it closed. I did not fully understand what he meant by that at first, but the more time I spent among the humans, the more I began to see the same pattern repeated in different forms. A young medical officer named Grace Ellery, working with the human delegation, once described treating a wounded colleague under circumstances that our medical priests would have called impossible, working through exhaustion and fear, because, as she put it, someone had to, and she happened to be the one standing there. A pilot named Noah Whitfield told me about flying a damaged transport craft through conditions that his own instruments said should have destroyed the vessel, because turning back would have meant leaving people behind who had no other way out. None of these humans considered themselves extraordinary. Each of them, when I asked, gave some version of the same answer. They had simply been standing in the place where something needed to be done, and they had decided to do it, without waiting for permission from a law, or a teaching, or a measurement that told them it could not be done. This, I began to understand, was the true difference between my people and theirs. It was not strength, or speed, or any single physical trait. It was a fundamental disagreement about what a limit actually was. To my people, a limit was a wall, fixed and final, given to us by teachers wiser than ourselves, never to be questioned. To the humans, a limit was simply the furthest point anyone had reached so far, always waiting for the next person willing to take one more step. The final report I submitted to the Ithran Assembly was not the report my superiors had hoped for. They wanted evidence that Owen Bright was an exception, some rare mutation among an otherwise ordinary species, a single point of light that did not threaten the wider truth of the reflex law. What I gave them instead was a record of dozens of similar moments among the human delegation, small and large, each one a quiet violation of a boundary our teachers had called absolute. I wrote that the reflex law was not false in the way a lie is false. It was true for us, measured accurately for the bodies and minds of my own people, tested across thousands of cycles by teachers who had no reason to deceive us. But it was not, and had never been, a universal truth about all living creatures everywhere. It was a description of our own limits, mistaken by generations of my people for a law governing all life. The gathering that received this report was tense. Some priests called for my dismissal, accusing me of allowing human ideas to corrupt my judgment. Others, quieter but more numerous than I expected, asked to see the full recordings of my conversations with Owen Bright and the other humans I had spoken with. Vashta I stood beside me throughout the entire gathering, though she said very little, allowing the evidence itself to make the argument she had already begun making months earlier. In the end, the assembly did not overturn the reflex law entirely. That would have been too great a shift for a single incident, however dramatic, to accomplish. But they did something that had never happened in the recorded history of my people. They opened the teaching to formal question. They created a new branch of study, dedicated entirely to examining whether other supposed limits, taught to us as absolute for thousands of cycles, might also be incomplete rather than final. I was placed in charge of this new branch of study, a position I did not seek and was not certain I deserved. My first act was to request continued contact with the human delegation, and to my quiet relief, this request was approved. Owen Bright remained on Threshold Station for 2 more seasons before his people rotated him back to their homeworld. In that time, his injured hand healed as much as it ever would. He lost some feeling in 2 fingers permanently, a small price, he said, for what it had purchased. He never spoke of the incident as though it made him special. When younger soldiers on the station began referring to him with quiet respect, he seemed uncomfortable with the attention, always redirecting the conversation toward whoever else happened to be nearby. On the day he was scheduled to depart, I found him near the same courtyard where I had first asked him about failure. He was checking equipment before boarding, moving with the same unhurried calm I had come to associate with him. I asked him, one final time, if he believed there was truly no floor beneath what a person could do. He considered the question for a long moment, the way he always did, and then he said something I have carried with me ever since. He said there was always a floor somewhere. Every person eventually found the true edge of what they could do, whether through age, or exhaustion, or simple chance. But the mistake, he said, was believing you had found that floor before you had actually tried standing on it. Most limits people accepted as final, he said, were not the true edge of anything. They were simply the point where someone had stopped trying, and mistaken their own tiredness for the shape of the universe. I asked him what he thought had made him move fast enough to catch the bolt that day, faster than our own teachings said any living body could move. He smiled slightly, the first time I had seen him do so in all our conversations, and said he honestly did not know. He said maybe it was practice, or maybe it was luck, or maybe it was simply that, in that particular second, failing had not been an option his mind was willing to accept, so his body had found a way around a limit that had never truly been tested before. He boarded the transport a short while later, and I did not see him again after that day, though I have followed his career from a distance through the records shared between our peoples during the years of peace that followed. I still teach the reflex law to young members of my assembly, because it remains a true and useful description of what our own bodies can do, and because understanding your own limits, even incomplete ones, has value. But I no longer teach it as an absolute law of the universe. I teach it now, alongside the story of a quiet human soldier who was told, indirectly, and without ever being informed of our teachings at all, that what he did that day was not supposed to be possible. He did it anyway, because nobody had told him it was not possible, and because in the single second that mattered most, a life stood on the other side of a limit he had never been taught to respect. I think of that moment often, the 4 seconds of frozen silence after his hand closed around fire, the low, mournful sound of a young guard realizing the world was larger and stranger than he had been taught. I think of Vashta I standing before the gathering, telling her own people that a truth which cannot survive being questioned was never truly a law at all. Mostly, I think of Owen Bright himself, an ordinary man by every measurement his own people could offer, who simply refused to accept that ordinary was the end of what he was capable of becoming, and who proved, in a single breath, that the gods we trusted to measure the universe had only ever measured us. We have not yet found the true edge of what the humans can do. I no longer believe we ever will.